Of all the things you could be wrong about, being wrong about the Iraq War is probably the most important, but I think maybe a second is being fundamentally wrong about how we ended up in the worst economic collapse of our lifetimes. And Mike Bloomberg, he's wrong. Watch.
Some reference to the elements that led to where we are today. Could you go a little bit deeper and tell us from your perspective, how did we get here? What are the root causes of the crisis that
you can go back. I would say it probably all started back when there was a lot of pressure on banks to make loans to everyone. Redlining, if you remember, was the term where banks took whole neighborhoods and said, people in these neighborhoods are poor, they're not going to be able to pay off their mortgages, tell them your salesmen don't go into those areas. And then Congress got involved, as local elected officials as well, and said, oh, that's not fair, these people should be able to get credit. And once you started pushing in that direction, banks started making more and more loans where the credit of the person buying the house wasn't as good as you would like. Now, it's not so bad when the market for houses keeps going up, because the nice thing about making a mortgage loan is it's very secure. After all, if the borrower defaults, you simply sell the house and you have something that's worth more than the value of the mortgage. And that assumes that real estate prices never go down, and we just discovered that they could.
So, wow, there was like systemic racism in how loans were given out, who was given loans, who had access to areas to buy houses, interest rates, all that. And there was an effort to try to solve that just a little bit. And look at what you get when you solve that. You crash the economy, you dummies. That was what he offered up. It wasn't like they gave that as a theory and he talked about it for a bit. That was his core response on why did the economy fall apart.
He just did a pro-redlining talk there. That's unbelievable.
In 2008.
Yeah, that wasn't like 1978 and Corn Pop had come into the pool. That's 2008. Redlining is specifically on it is a racist policy. That's like saying, well, I mean, there's a value in that's like literally defending segregation, literally, and saying, oh, we're going to deny people loans in certain areas because they're black. And he's saying, well, that was the good old days. And when we stopped systematically discriminating against blacks and Latinos, it was those blacks and Latinos being irresponsible that caused the collapse. Wow, okay, look, other than being deeply, deeply immoral, it's also deeply, deeply wrong. So, and there's a good reason why Bloomberg is wrong on purpose. So now, the reality is the housing crisis was the trigger that caused the collapse. But what the bankers never want to talk about is that what the gun was. Okay, the trigger was the housing crisis, but the gun was derivatives. So what they would do is they would say, okay, well, let's make a bet here that they're going to be able to pay off this mortgage, and they would bundle them up in CDOs, and then they would say, okay, now let's make a bet on whether that package of mortgages is going to be solid or not solid, good or not good, paid or not paid, etc. And those bets would be multiples of what the original package was, 10 times as high. So when one of the packages collapsed, a package of mortgages put together, it triggered off the bet going wrong. So then they lost 10 times as much money, and it created a domino effect. Why? Because they had removed protections on leverage, so the banks could make wild bets. Sometimes put $1 down, but make a $100 bet. So when you lose the dollar, all of a sudden you're not losing $1, you're losing $100, which you don't have in the bank. And you did that by betting on these collateralized debt obligations and the derivative packages, etc. So I tell you all of that because there is a real answer as to why we had the collapse. And the bankers first pumped all that out into the market. Why? Because they were making money off of it. They're like, oh, go buy, oh, we got great mortgages for you. And they were handing them out like candy, right? Oh, they would say oftentimes, oh, you don't even have to worry about filling it out. But it was irresponsible blacks and Latinos who are at fault. No, the bankers told them, I don't care if you have a job. I don't care if you fill out the information all the times, because we're not, like, the money we make on this mortgage is good and fine, but we're making the real money on the derivative bet, okay? So just go, and they're handing him out. Meanwhile, the entire time they're making commission and they're collecting all of that, and they took it home in bonuses and giant bonuses on those giant bets.
Yeah.
And then just when they thought it was gonna collapse, financial institutions like Goldman Sachs knew ahead of time, because they knew they packed it full of garbage. In fact, we know that because it's in their internal emails that came out later. They then turned around and bet against those same toxic assets that they themselves had created. And they called their own customers suckers, okay? And they made money on both sides. Then they got a government bailout, and then they got a Federal Reserve bailout.
Yeah.
Now, Michael Bloomberg is not stupid enough to not know all that.
What does he know about like Wall Street and stuff?
So if you don't know, Mike Bloomberg made all of his money off the Bloomberg terminals, which service Wall Street, okay? So that's Mike Bloomberg using racism to defend the people who caused the 2008 collapse, who are his customers and his friends.
Yeah.
That is about as vile a thing as you could possibly do.
Yeah, and that's the sort of quote that you couldn't really get a quote like that from Donald Trump, because he wouldn't have been able to work through all of that. It takes someone who's a little bit more put together mentally to sketch out such an inherently false and racist argument. And so a couple of little things I want to add. The idea that these bankers were now obligated to give the mortgages to people who didn't deserve them or couldn't pay them off, that they had bad credit. Did some people have bad credit? Sure. As Cenk said, they were enthusiastic about giving to people that they didn't think would be able to pay for it, because they'd make the money in the short term. It doesn't matter if the economy falls apart or if an individual company falls apart, they will still have their money. But also importantly, they were trying to get them to take out more money than they knew they could pay for. Again, because the incentives were set up all wrong. And they structured the mortgage payments in a way that would inevitably balloon and explode in the face of the person who had it. None of that had anything to do with the individual who took it. They don't have the financial training necessarily to understand that. And it doesn't matter even if they have a job, good income. It's designed to fail effectively. None of that had anything to do with stopping discrimination in giving mortgages to people. That was designed to benefit people who are taking advantage of all these individuals. But importantly, one thing I think we need to add to this is, it wasn't just a racist argument. It was also a racist argument that completely erased race from the argument. Because he never said there that redlining and the discrimination in loans was about race. He said it was discriminatory towards poor people, as if just for decades and decades they just wouldn't give loans to poor people. Well, I mean, if you look back in the work done to highlight and make clear what was happening with blockbusting and redlining and all this stuff, like people who had the exact same income who were white could get loans. They could get mortgages for certain neighborhoods. They could buy houses where they wanted to. But people who had the exact same financial resources in terms of wealth and income, if they weren't white, they couldn't. And so he wouldn't even acknowledge what the fundamental problem was. A guy who at that point was presiding over stop and frisk was also attempting to hide another component of systematized government racism.
So you might not know what a collateralized debt obligation is.
I barely do.
Okay, but Mike Bloomberg does. He definitely knows what it is. Remember, these are the guys who built these toxic assets in the first place. So when full well knowing what was in the toxic assets and what actually caused the collapse, partly because, again, some of his friends then seeing the collapse about to happen, bet that it would happen. So they knew exactly what was happening. For those people to know the actual root causes of it and then blame poor minority people and saying, going forward, since it was their fault, we should discriminate against them again, knowing they caused the collapse. I get it, they're the bad guys, and bad guys do things like that. That guy wants to be the head of the Democratic Party? Oh, hell no, okay? And by the way, that's the guy that the entire national media right now is celebrating and defending. And so, look, the people on TV aren't that bright, so I don't know if any of them know what a CDO is. I don't know if they know what actually caused the collapse in the derivatives. But But what he said there was not at all subtle. He used the word redlining. Redlining is specifically a racist policy used against minorities. Yeah. He blamed minorities for the collapse that his friends caused. That's why he has all the money that he has now, because of Wall Street, that he spends on buying off all of those TV stations through all of his ads. Not only does he get the ads out, but he also gets positive press coverage because he's pumping in hundreds of millions of dollars to those same TV stations that are covering him fairly.
Yeah, like stop and frisk and how he viewed the economic collapse. Like two major issues, one intimately tied in with him, both intimately tied in with New York. Like two of the biggest things that he could have a stance on, he's wrong. And in the most old school racist Republican, it's just victim blaming, that's all it is. And if his view of the economic collapse is to blame the people who were most victimized before the collapse and certainly after the collapse, to blame them, what do you think he's going to do in the future if there's economic troubles? He's always going to view the people at the bottom as the problem to be solved potentially. He talks exactly like Reagan, exactly like Republicans have for literally decades. And I honestly think not only to the media, it needs to be shoved in the media's face, and he needs to be on the debate stage for all of this to be brought up and thrown in his face, but the ads can't start in 2 months against him. They can't start after Super Tuesday. The Democratic candidates should all already be pointing this out. Bernie should rightfully be pointing it out because he actually is a champion for the sorts of people that Bloomberg has made a career off of attacking. Buttigieg should cynically be pointing it out because he does terribly with non-white voters, and maybe if he's attacking someone else for being racist, that theoretically could help, and that's a pragmatic reason for Buttigieg to care about it. But they should all be making ads about this because as they're going back and forth in Iowa and New Hampshire, and we're probably gonna see that in the next 2 states too, Mike Bloomberg is advertising in literally every state where there's going to be a contest. And every week he goes up by 1.5 points in the national polls. And if they wait too long, God only knows what we're gonna end up with.
So guys, last couple of things here. Number one, progressives have to overcome bigger hurdles than the rest, because now if any establishment candidate had dirt on Bernie Sanders, they just go to any outlet, national outlet, and they would love to run it. If they got Bernie Sanders on a bad policy from back in 2008, New York Times would run it so quickly, make your head spin. Washington Post, CNN, they would all love it, trip over themselves, competing to get that Oppo research, right? You give this on tape to the press, and they go, no, I don't want to run it. Benjamin Dixon broke the story the other day about how Bloomberg, all the way in 2015, after it had already been ruled unconstitutional, defended stop and frisk, saying that Black and Latino young males had it coming. They're the criminals, so that's why they did it. And a lot of the press said we wouldn't cover it because Benjamin Dixon is a Bernie Sanders supporter.
They attacked him.
But wait a minute, it's on tape. Who cares who gave you the tape, right? And so since the press, why is that such a huge problem? Since the press won't cover it, then you got to run ads and spend your money to, and somehow try to explain all of that in 30 seconds, because the press goes, ha ha, I'm just not gonna cover your stories. But if he's got dirt on you, I'll give him millions of dollars in free media. So that's a hurdle we got to overcome. And then on top of that, if Bernie Sanders himself were to say, hey, Mike Bloomberg said that he's in favor of redlining, Bernie Sanders is so rude. We got to unify the party. Yeah. This doesn't help unify. If you say things against Bernie Sanders, that's not a problem. I mean, we did a story earlier today where every other House Democrat is saying Bernie Sanders is going to cost us the election. He's the worst, et cetera. That doesn't hurt unity at all. But if Bernie says it about Bloomberg, I guarantee you, every pundit on TV will be like, he's hurting the party. He's hurting the party. How can you? It's so rude. You see how? And I bet you people online will say something about this, the way that they're rude in pointing out policies.
My final point / question is, in just a couple of weeks, we're going to have a debate, and hypothetically, Michael Bloomberg will be there. Although I would not be shocked to find out that he was busy and he just won't show. Like honestly, you think he's necessarily going to show up? He doesn't want to be on that stage, and I have no doubt that if he shows up, I think the candidates will attack him over stop and frisk. This, whatever comes up tomorrow, is going to be terrible. Stay on the edge of your seat for that. But some of them might get attacked. I wonder though. There was a great grilling of Pete Buttigieg over South Bend at the last debate. Okay, so they were willing to do that, to their credit. like Chuck Todd, who thinks that Bernie Sanders supporters are digital brown shirts, or at least says it, and doesn't critique it online, he's gonna be one of the moderators, which is an issue for how he's going to approach Bernie Sanders. But if they have a chance to hold Bloomberg accountable, will they? Will Chuck Todd? Will all the other people? Like, are they actually going to do it? I mean, we've already seen there was the Joy Reid thing about Bloomberg yesterday. Like, they have more ammunition against him than anyone else. And by the way, not the same old, twice baked stuff that we've been having at every debate for a year now. This is new and dramatic. It's on tape, it's verifiable. It's about a guy who's spending tons of money. He's a new entrant. How dramatic to bring that up on the debate stage, but will they actually do it?
Well, look, the fact that they're moderating it is already absurd. No progressive's ever allowed to moderate a Democratic debate. But if I had called Buttigieg supporters brown shirts, do you think anybody, first of all, nobody let me moderate a debate in the first place for the last 18 years. But if I had said that, well, obviously everybody in the media would be like disqualified. He's a Bernie Sanders supporter who thinks the other guys are brown shirts. Chuck Todd said it, is he disqualified? Nope, he's leading the panel of moderators. So I wonder if he'll be fair to Bernie Sanders but look at how rigged the media is against this. That we're pleading with however many moderators to just ask one question that would be challenging to a conservative Democrat, just one. And if they did, we'd celebrate like they did with Buttigieg. They asked them a question. They asked a conservative Democrat a tough question. Oh my God, we lit fireworks off.
Well, he did.
Right?
I got drunk after that.
And then for 20 minutes that same debate began with, let's talk about what's wrong with democratic socialism and why Democrats can never win with it. And that's just how things are done. And so, but back to Bloomberg, last thing, if Biden is wrong for defending busing back in the 1970s, and he is, Bloomberg defending redlining in the year 2008? I'll tell you this, if Bernie Sanders had said that, I guarantee you, everyone in the media would have said disqualifying. So let's see what they say now. Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.